The celebration felt heavy, not because of the weight of the mission, but because everyone knew what was at stake. Tomorrow, they would leave Earth behind, some forever. The party was held in a private lounge at the World Space Center, filled with laughter, drinks, and the nervous energy of people about to do something no one had done before. Luke leaned against the glass wall, staring at the stars above the city. His wife approached quietly and told him to speak to Bobby before leaving. Luke nodded and left the party. In the quiet of his son's room, he found Bobby sitting up in bed, clutching a worn copy of The Little Prince. Bobby asked who would read to him while his father was away. Luke smiled, sat beside him, and made a promise. Every night in space, he would read the same book Bobby did. They would be reading it together across millions of miles. Bobby hugged him tightly. Back at the party, the astronauts each dealt with their own thoughts. Nicholas played his usual role, the charming bad boy making one last play before liftoff. Sergei and Renee, the two international astronauts, quietly observed the rest, speaking to each other in low voices. Woody and Blake stood together, a rare married couple in a program that usually discouraged attachments. They made each other stronger. NASA couldn't argue with the results. Jim finally arrived and the room lit up. Everyone loved Jim. He was a legend among the astronauts, a mentor to many of them. But there was also pain in his eyes, something deeper than exhaustion. As the night wore on, he, Luke, and Woody found themselves alone in a corner, talking and laughing, until Jim mentioned Maggie. The laughter stopped. Maggie had been his wife, and once they were the golden couple of space exploration. They had built their lives around a single dream, to walk on Mars together. But when Maggie got sick, Jim gave it all up to care for her. She passed before the first Mars crew was selected. Luke, still bitter about it, said what everyone else was thinking, that Jim and Maggie deserved to go more than anyone. Jim tried to brush it off with grace, but the pain in his face said everything. When Luke left, Jim remained alone at the table, lost in memory. 13 months later, the mission had reached Mars. 4 astronauts, Luke, Nick, Sergei, and Renee, stepped onto the red planet. Their base camp had been set up near the Vis Marineris, and most of their time was spent running geological surveys and scanning the terrain. Then a rover sent back strange data. A mountain, unlike anything in the region, was topped with a glinting, reflective material. Initial scans suggested ice, a potential underground reservoir. Luke ordered a closer look. From orbit, Woody, Phil, Jim, and Terry monitored the signal from the World Space Station. They watched the feeds as Luke's team approached the mountain. That's when the signal hit. A strange sound crackled through their headsets, nothing they could identify. Luke ordered the use of the high-power radio wave radar. They needed clearer scans. The radar pulsed, cutting through layers of dust and rock. The results came back. It wasn't ice beneath the mountain. It was metal. Luke hesitated, confused. "That has to be wrong," he said. "Move in closer. Full power." They did. A massive energy surge erupted from the mountain. Everything stopped working. Instruments died. Then the wind started, fierce, erratic, not natural. It twisted into a tornado, but it didn't behave like weather. It moved with intention. It hunted. It devoured Sergei, then Renee, then Nick, snatched them off the ground, their screams lost to the storm. Luke ran. Somehow, impossibly, he survived. When it was over, the mountain was gone, replaced by a giant metallic face rising out of the dust, staring silently into the sky. On the World Space Station, alarms blared. The energy pulse had reached orbit, cutting communications. Emergency protocols kicked in. A scrambled video feed came through, a broken, glitching image of Luke, bruised, bloodied, whispering that everyone was dead, that something had attacked them, and then the feed cut out. Mars had gone dark. The silence from Mars grew longer by the hour. After Luke's final transmission, a jagged image, his face bloodied and broken, nothing more came. The base station scrambled to make sense of the energy pulse that had ripped through communications. There was no way to know if Luke was alive or if whatever had killed the others was still out there, waiting. Woody paced the control room. Phil monitored every frequency, every orbiting relay. Jim stood off to the side, quiet, until the meeting began. The station's captain wanted to shut it all down. "We don't know what we're walking into," he said. "Sending another crew may be suicide." "We already sent them," Woody said. "We owe them more than silence." Phil pointed out that the Saturn probe was approaching Mars. They could use it to get a new scan of the surface before committing to a landing. The captain reluctantly agreed, and Woody made one final condition. If they were going, Jim would fly the ship. It made sense. Jim knew the systems better than anyone. He and Maggie had helped design them. No one had logged more Mars simulation time. Still, the captain hesitated. Jim hadn't flown in years. But there was something unspoken in the room. This was his mission too, and it always had been. Several months later, the rescue crew, Jim, Woody, Terry, and Phil, neared Mars orbit. The long flight had given them time to prepare, but tension filled every corner of the ship. Phil distracted himself by turning candies into DNA strand models. Jim, always half in his own head, snuck a few pieces from his supply. The Saturn probe beamed back its data. The camera sweep showed 3 makeshift graves marked outside the previous crew's base camp. Phil clung to the hope this meant Luke had survived long enough to bury the others. Terry wasn't so sure. The graves could mean Luke was the last to die. Worse, the sight of the energy pulse was still emitting. It hadn't faded or weakened. That same pulse continued, like a warning. As they prepared for descent, disaster struck. Micrometeoroids, tiny high-speed rocks, punched through the hull. The ship hissed and buckled. Alarms screamed. Oxygen began leaking into space. The crew worked fast, patching holes from the inside and out. But what they didn't catch in time was the damage to the fuel tanks. When they fired the engines for descent, the leaking fuel ignited. A fireball tore through the lower decks. The ship was destroyed. Floating now in the void, tethered only to each other, the 4 astronauts drifted toward a refueling module in orbit from a previous mission. It was their only shot. But they had miscalculated. The distance was too great. Woody took the grappling gun and made the call. He would use all the fuel in his jetpack, fly full speed, and tie the line to the module. It was the only way to pull the others across. He launched like a bullet through the silence. The line hit the module. He secured it. But he'd gone too far, out of fuel. No way back. Terry screamed for someone to do something. Jim already knew the truth. Woody wouldn't survive. Terry didn't care. She pulled herself along the tether, trying to reach him. Woody begged her to stop. When she tried to use the grappling gun to pull him in, the line came up short. 1 meter, 2 maybe. Not enough. She said she'd get closer. Try again. Woody knew what would happen if she did. He looked at her, then reached up and removed his helmet. It was over. The others drifted in silence until they reached the module. Mars came into view again. Smaller now, colder. They landed using what fuel remained. At the old base camp, they found wreckage, dust, and broken tools, but the greenhouse still worked. Plants had survived. So had Luke. He emerged slowly from behind a battered structure and tackled Jim to the ground, disoriented, delirious. For a moment, he thought Jim wasn't real, but Jim spoke softly. He mentioned the book Bobby was reading, the one Luke promised to read every night in space. That brought Luke back. He began to speak. He told them how he lived, off vegetables, water from the greenhouse system, solitude. But he didn't say he survived. He said he was spared, for a reason. When Jim asked what reason, Luke showed them a photo. The metallic face, now mostly buried again by wind-blown dust. The same one they had seen from orbit, once dismissed as a trick of shadows. "It's not just a monument," Luke said. "It's a message." He explained how he'd spent the year analyzing the signal they had picked up right before the attack. He decoded the wave patterns and plotted them spatially. They formed a DNA strand. It wasn't human. "This is a self-portrait," Luke said. "A signature. Someone placed the face here for us to find. They wanted us to know who they were." Terry noticed something odd. The DNA strand was missing its final chromosome pair. Jim stared at the model. Something clicked. A memory. Candies. A joke about building DNA. He realized the missing chromosomes weren't an error. They were a question. A test. When Luke's team blasted the mountain with radar, they sent the wrong answer. That's why the face attacked. It wasn't hostile. It was waiting. Jim said they had one chance to send the right response. A correct sequence, complete DNA, a signal that said, "We understand, and we're human." The others hesitated, but Jim insisted. "This is why we came. If we don't answer, everyone died for nothing." They reconfigured the rover, adjusted the signal. They transmitted. The face stirred. Dust peeled away. A white doorway opened. Jim, Luke, and Terry stared at it. Jim gave Phil the order. Fix the return module. If they weren't back in time, he should leave. Then the three of them walked into the light. The door closed behind them. The air inside the face was warm. Jim, Luke, and Terry stood in silence, slowly removing their helmets. They expected metal walls, machinery, anything that looked like a spacecraft, but what surrounded them was impossible. They were inside a vast, hollow sphere, glowing from within, the walls alive with stars. Above them spun a perfect model of the solar system, suspended mid-air. Planets orbited slowly, silently. Then the planets began to change. Mars shifted first. Green, blue. Clouds swirling over oceans. Life, then fire. A meteor struck. Mars cracked and darkened. Oceans boiled away. The image trembled with violence before fading to black. A figure emerged behind them. Slender, tall, red-skinned. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The story unfolded wordlessly around them, as though it was being placed directly into their minds. They saw ships, elegant, gleaming vessels, launching from the dying surface of ancient Mars. One ship broke formation, turning not toward the stars, but toward a pale blue dot in the distance. Earth. They saw microscopic life, single-cell organisms, emerging, evolving, growing. They were looking at the beginning of Earth's biology, a Martian seed planted in fertile soil. Humanity had not simply come from the stars. They were Martians. The face on Mars had never been a warning. It had been a monument, a guidepost for the children of a lost world to find their way home. And now they had. Terry stepped forward, eyes wide. "We've been searching for life out there," she whispered. "But we were the thing we were looking for." Luke's voice cracked. "All this time, we were the legacy." The alien figure raised its hand. A doorway opened behind them. Through it, they could see the base camp again, the damaged module waiting, Phil pacing in front of it. Jim didn't move. He was still staring at the projection. A new image had appeared, a countdown. Luke grabbed his arm. "We have to go. That thing, it's about to launch." Jim shook his head. "I'm staying." Terry turned to him, stunned. "What are you talking about?" "This isn't the end," Jim said. "It's an invitation." Luke stared at him. "Jim." Jim looked at both of them, and for the first time, he didn't seem weighed down by grief. He looked free. "This is what Maggie and I dreamed of," he said softly. "Not just touching Mars, understanding it, meeting them, going farther than anyone ever has." Terry's eyes welled with tears. "You might never come back." "I know," Jim said, "but I have to go. This is what I was born for." Luke nodded, his throat tight. He had seen death, survived horrors, but this moment, this choice, hit harder than anything else. They embraced, quickly, fiercely. Then Jim turned and walked toward the center of the room. A platform rose beneath his feet, the chamber flooded with pale blue light. Luke and Terry ran. They barely made it through the doorway before it sealed behind them. Outside, Phil was shouting over the storm winds. "We have to go, now!" They scrambled into the module as the wind howled louder, the sky over Mars turning red again. Dust storms danced in the distance. Terry strapped in beside Luke. He glanced at her, then at the empty seat where Jim should have been. No words were needed. As the module launched, Mars fell away below them. In the silence of orbit, Terry pointed. There, a small ship was rising from the planet, smooth and silver, accelerating with impossible speed. They watched as it passed them, curving away from the red planet and toward the black sea of stars. Luke pressed a hand to the window. "Good luck, Jim." He thought of Bobby. He thought of the book. And for the first time, he knew how the story ended. Somewhere out there, his friend was traveling into the unknown, not as an astronaut, not as a human, but as a messenger, a Martian child returning home, and humanity had just begun to remember who it was